Good morning. Welcome to Jamaica Live. We're broadcasting from Bridge 99 here in Kingston. At midday we link with Irish Jam in New York so that we are able to reach the Jamaican community there. Today is the 25th of April. And next week when I come back here, next week Monday, God's willing, we're going to be into May. Time is really moving, but welcome to the program. This is Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We broadcast every Monday between 11 and 1 o'clock. You know, we talk a lot about the economy, what is happening in the economy, the levels of inflation, the levels of job creation and employment, wage levels, because these are the things that determine how people live, the standard of living that they're able to enjoy, whether they're able to feed themselves, to send their children to school, to afford medical care. It all boils down to one thing, and that thing is called growth. You know, if you bake a cake that gives you 8 small slices, that is what you end up with. 8 small slices. If you bake a bigger cake, you will end up with more small slices or maybe 8 bigger slices. Strong, sustained economic growth is something that has eluded us for decades. Economic growth of between 3% and 5% each year is what is considered to be reasonable. Above that, you're doing well. Below that, you're not cutting it. You're marking time. And your people are not getting ahead. They're not living the life that can make them happy. The new buzzword for all of this is prosperity. So we need to ask ourselves the question, how have we been doing? The last time we saw growth of more than 3%, remember I said the benchmark for reasonable growth is between 3 and 5%. The last time we saw growth of more than 3% was back in the late 1980s. We struggle sometimes to reach 1%. Only twice in the last 20 years, and I'm leaving out last year because that was a rebound from COVID. But only twice in the last 20 years did we ever get over 2% growth. Our average annual rate of economic growth since 2000, and I stop at 2019 because 2020 was COVID. We don't want to get our numbers confused. But our average annual rate of growth between 2000 and 2019 was less than 1%. We simply have not been cutting it. And we need to ask ourselves the question, why? All sorts of reasons have been advanced. If you listen to the multilaterals like the IMF and the World Bank, the  what is called the Washington Consensus, They say it is because we have not put our house in order. For many years we incurred fiscal deficits. The government was spending more money than the taxes that it was able to collect. As a result, we were carrying a huge debt, higher than our GDP, which meant that more money had to be spent servicing that debt, and less money was available to develop the country, to develop our infrastructure, our roads, our water supplies, our public services like schools and health facilities. It also meant that we had to maintain high interest rates in order to raise the money to service that debt. If you have to borrow so much money to service the debt, you have to offer higher interest rates. And that choked off investments because people cannot borrow when interest rates are high to finance investments, especially investments that take a long time to break even and to generate the profits to pay back those loans. Well, we have made good headway in dealing with these issues. Our fiscal arrangements are now in reasonably good shape. We have eliminated the fiscal deficits. We have reduced the debt to GDP ratio. It actually came below 100% before COVID. I think it has bumped up a little above 100%, but it is still much better than the 148% that it was 10, 12 years ago. Our foreign reserves are strong. But we are still waiting to see the economic growth that all of these things were supposed to facilitate. Very often we hear it said that the lack of investment is a primary factor in our poor growth performance. Theories like these have to be tested against the data. The World Bank data shows that the level of investment in Jamaica, what in the jargon of economics is called gross fixed capital formation. Gross fixed capital formation, that's what they mean when they talk about it, level of investment. But that figure as a percentage of GDP in Jamaica is 24%. That is the same as Panama. Somewhat less than Dominican Republic, which is at 27%, but considerably more than Costa Rica, which is at 17%. And I'm using World Bank figures for 2020. The level of investment taking place in Jamaica depends much on the flow of foreign investments into the country, investments from abroad. The World Bank data shows that since 2000, what is called foreign direct investment, FDI, has averaged annually for Jamaica around 5% of GDP. 5%. This is much less than Panama. Panama is recording 8%. But our 5% is better than Dominican Republic, where it is less than 4%. And it is only a little less than Costa Rica, which is at 6%. Another factor that we are told is hindering growth is the level of bureaucracy, the convenience with which people are able to do business, are able to comply with the regulatory requirements, the ease with which they can meet employment standards and regulations and conduct their day-to-day transactions. The World Bank tracks these issues in a measurement called the Ease of Doing Business Index. And in that index, we rank higher. Listen to me. We rank higher than Costa Rica. We rank higher than Panama. We rank higher than the Dominican Republic. But all of these economies have achieved significant growth over the last 20 years. Since 2000, the economy in Costa Rica has grown by 111%. Listen to me, 111%. Dominican Republic, 150%. Panama, 204%. Our Jamaica, 14%. 1-4. I'm trying to understand it. We are told also that a major hindrance to economic growth is our high crime rate, especially our murder rate. You know, it is argued that sustained economic growth will not occur in an environment where people do not feel safe, where production costs have to include heavy expenditure for security, making many investment projects uncompetitive and unviable and unbankable. That has to be an issue. But are we sure that fixing that problem would lead to economic growth, would sort of remove the shackles and growth would spurt? It is useful to look at some other countries which have similar issues to see what their experience has been and how their performance compares with ours. We have the second highest murder rate in the world, not something of which we can be proud. But based on the data, we have the second highest murder rate in the world. The only country worse than us is El Salvador. But since 2000 and up to 2019, their economy grew by 46%. Ours grew by 14%. Honduras is another country with a high crime rate, higher than ours. But during that same period, their economy, the economy of Honduras, grew by 106%. Jamaica's grew, ours grew by 14%. So yes, crime is a factor that negatively affects our rate of growth, but it clearly is not the only factor. There's an argument that if we fix the crime problem, the economy would grow. It may well be that if we were able to grow the economy, we would be able to fix the crime problem. Crime is difficult to deal with. So we have to ask ourselves the question, are there other factors that are easier to deal with, that are restricting, inhibiting our growth? And if so, what are those? You know, another reason offered for our anemic growth is our lack of skilled labor. The Prime Minister last week spoke about the shortage of labor and the possible need for Jamaica to import labor. This really is nothing new. Although, as he said, he's the first Prime Minister to have declared it. We're not short of people needing work and seeking work. Many of them, if you ask them what work you're seeking and what work are you able to do. They will say anything. I have yet to see a job description that says anything. For a long time, we have been short of nurses. We have many Cuban nurses working in our hospitals. We even have some nurses from Nigeria. We're short of specialist teachers, like in maths and science. We're short of technicians, of welders, electricians. Try getting a plumber who is competent, who knows what he's doing and what needs to be done. Not someone who, when he looks at the problem, is as confused as you are. I happen to own a boat. Boat owners will tell you that when we need a marine mechanic, we have to make a booking weeks in advance. They are scarce, and they're always busy. So shortage of skilled labor, especially in the context of a digital economy that involves more and more knowledge-based jobs, can be an obstacle in achieving economic growth. But are we missing some things? When I analyze our economic performance over the years, sometimes I feel, I get the feeling like I'm looking at my car engine. It is missing badly. The gas pump is working, the oil pressure is okay, the injectors are clean. The cylinders are a little worn, but the compression is not bad. But the car keeps missing. What's wrong? How can I find out? How can I fix it? In other words, are there other things that are hindering growth that we need to focus on? And if so, what are those? And how difficult or how easy would it be to fix them? That's what we're focusing on today. The robust economic growth that continues to elude, to escape us. The kind of growth that can enable us to enjoy life more. That can enable us to wake up in the morning feeling that today is better than yesterday and feeling optimistic that tomorrow is going to be better than today. That's what economic growth provides and creates, and that's what we're talking about today. And so I'm very pleased, as my first guest on the program, to welcome a well-known financial analyst, somebody who is very attuned to these issues, and somebody who I've had on the program before. I want to welcome financial analyst Mr. Dennis Chung. Dennis, do I have you on the line?
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Golding. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Dennis, help me. I spent the weekend looking at some numbers.
Yes.
I've been trying to find out what makes the Jamaican economy so allergic to growth. And I looked at other countries that have problems not dissimilar to ours, in terms of crime, levels of investment, ease of doing business, and they're doing better than us. What's wrong with us, Dennis?
Well, I tell you something. A lot of people, when they analyze it, they don't really look at what the real problem with growth is. And you're correct. There are countries with crime issues. There are countries with the same issues that we have that are growing more. And that's because people don't understand that growth comes down to productivity. So you're making that link to what the Prime Minister said about the need for skilled labor and what you just said, right? Understand that that is the real problem that we face, right? So crime, for example, affects growth because it affects productivity. So if you were, for example, to remove crime totally and persons could run 3 shifts instead of 2 shifts, what you're doing is increasing the productivity of the building and the resources that you have, right? If you remove crime from a community where the persons that are most productive, like we see what happened with this young footballer, are not killed, then you actually increase in your productivity. So it all comes down to productivity. So you can have a situation where you have high crime, but then you have productivity increasing, for example, in capital and other factors of production or labor generally, right? And therefore, that is a real issue that we need to understand that's causing the problem. So we can increase, even Jamaica can increase our growth and productivity even without reducing the crime. But the crime itself can have a significant impact.
But tell me now.
Mm-hmm.
A country that I want to compare us with is Honduras, because they have a hell of a crime problem, similar to ours. They have some of their per capita income is lower than ours. But their economy over the last 19 years, and I stop at 2019 because 20 was COVID, no?
Mm-hmm.
But up to 2019, since 2000, their economy grew by 106%. Ours grew by 14%. What are you saying to me? Are you saying to me that the people in Honduras are more productive than we are?
Well, growth comes down to productivity, because growth is that, and that is what it would imply, because growth is that if I can make 100 widgets with $80 of resources today, then if I can make 110 widgets with $80 of resources today, then I've grown by 10%. And that is what it comes down to fundamentally. And we have not, even if we were to fix our crime problem today, we would eke out a little more growth, but we'd still have a problem with growth in this country because we have not addressed the labor productivity issues.
Well, Dennis, let's focus on that, because one of the questions that I would have to ask myself, I mean, I spent a long time in government. I was Prime Minister of the country. One of the questions I'd have to ask myself is, what are our institutions that are supposed to be preparing the labor force? What have they been doing, you know? We have issues in our schools and so on. But what have they been doing? What has our post-secondary institutions, and I'm not talking about tertiary institutions alone, I'm talking about our vocational training institutions like Hart and so on. What have they been doing? In other words, when the Prime Minister says that we're short of construction labor, we're short of labor, but particularly in construction. And I noticed when I looked at the report from the Ministry of Labor about the issue of work permits, construction was the sector that gobbled up the largest share of work permits. What have our institutions, our vocational training institutions, our trade centers all over the place, what have they been doing in terms of providing the carpenters, the masons, the steelmen, the welders? What has been happening? I mean, in other words, every year they are turning out people with some certificates, and I use that word deliberately, right? Now, what are those certificates saying, and why it is that they are not simply gobbled up in the construction industry so that we wouldn't have the shortage we're talking about?
Well, I don't think that they've been doing a good job. And I say that, and I use two examples. Number one, when I was sitting on the Linkages Council for the Ministry of Tourism, and we were trying to match up what the hotels required with tourism output from places like UTEC and UAE. What was happening is that the demand of the labor that the hotels needed were not being provided by these institutions. So they had to, for example, go out overseas and get people for management positions in the hotels, right? And therefore, we made an attempt to align that reality of the hotels with the places like the UTEC. So therefore, the talking that should be happening between the institutions were not. The other one, though, is that if you look at our heart, which I think has a fundamental role to play in this change, if you look at the persons that they're producing hairdressers and barbers and all those things, but they're not really fully aligned with what we need to grow the economy. So Hart has a very good program in the tourism sector. They have a place in Runaway Bay where they produce workers, and they are doing very well. But there has not been enough alignment, and you see how tourism is doing. So if we produce the workers, the industries will benefit, but we're not seeing these institutions aligning themselves properly with what is required in the marketplace. So the Prime Minister is right. I mean, I tell you something. I have had, and I have conversations all the while with the head of the Master Business Association. People say that, why are people using the Chinese for construction, right? I have had dealings with local contractors, and I can tell you it is a headache to deal with local contractors, right?
Headache in what sense?
In terms of just getting things done, the productivity, getting the delivery done. It is a headache.
Is it a cultural problem?
It is a cultural issue because as soon as some of our local workers go on a site, there's a strike happening, right?
You know, Dennis. I remember years ago. I remember when I went down to break ground for the Secrets Hotel in Montego Bay, and when I got there was a whole large crowd of people outside the gate, and they bombarded me, and they complained that we were bringing in all these foreign construction workers on the site, and they couldn't get work. And when I got back to my office, I called Pernell Charles. He was the Minister of Labour. And I asked him, I said, Pernell, these people are complaining about too much foreign workers on the site, doing work that they can do. What's going on? He said, let me check it out, I'll call you back. He called me back in a couple of hours and said, look, I've checked it out. We have granted 19 work permits for that project. And these are all master, whatever you call them, technicians, whatever. So I couldn't understand it. But when I sent a team down to go and investigate to find out what are these people complaining about if we only have 19 foreign people, supervisors and so on the site. You know what they said to me, Dennis? They said, look, when one of these foreign guys, he's a master carpenter, he's putting up, some structure. He climbs up on the ladder. And while he's there, his hammer falls out of his holster. He comes down from the ladder, he pick up the hammer and he go back up and he finish his job. And when he come down, he take the shovel and he scoop up the debris and he put it in a wheelbarrow and he wheels that away. He says that is their culture. Now, if you take a Jamaican construction site, when you put a class 1, a grade 1 carpenter up on that ladder, if the hammer dropped out from his holster, he has to have a second on the ground to pick up the hammer and pass it back to him. And don't you dare suggest to him that he must now take a shovel and sweep up the debris. He's a master carpenter. He don't do that kind of work. Is there a kind of cultural transformation that we need to be talking about?
Yeah, man, and that is it, because that is something that I've heard already, right? And it is just comes down to productivity. The man who can complete something on time and within budget is going to be more productive than the man who does not do that, right? Because when you hire someone to do a job for you, you just want it done for the cost that you have agreed on. You don't want him to come back to you and say, well, this thing, there's a variation here because of this cost. And you don't want that, right? And, I mean, you could actually win in the long term, from a legal point of view. But you don't want that hassle.
So what you're saying is that we need to focus some more attention on productivity. What is happening to the productivity center that Joe Matalan and No used to be involved in? Is that still around?
It's still around. I don't know what's happening because I think that should be one of the primary organizations that we focus on. It should be driving a lot of these things. It should be having conversations with the same educational institutions. It should be having conversations with companies, right, and bringing everything together, and also with the labor people, right? Because in 2013, for example, and I think we recognize the problem of labor productivity. The IMF said that one of the most important pieces of legislation that need to be changed in 2013 was to improve labor market reform, and nothing has happened since then, right? We formed a committee in 2013, and I understand that a report might have been done, but we have not taken any steps. So when we get back out of our COVID slump, right, and get back to growth, we're not going to be seeing any growth average of more than 1% a year, I can tell you, if we don't change anything, because we're going to be having the same productivity issue, and productivity is what drives growth. And it's a chicken and egg situation, because if people don't get more productive and don't earn more money, then they're going to turn to crime, right? So people might say crime causes growth issues, but in many respects, the growth issues also causes crime.
Yeah, I made that point earlier. Dennis, we're going to have to keep the focus on this productivity thing. I want to get you back on the program. Perhaps I need to have a discussion on just that alone, not that broad economic, that alone, and I'm going to invite you back to discuss that with us. Thank you very much for joining me today.
No problem. Okay. All right, Mr. Golding. Bye.
Interesting discussion, interesting perspective from Dennis Chung, financial analyst. He's putting the finger on productivity. And if you look at the numbers, our productivity in Jamaica has been declining steadily. With the exception of a couple of years, it has declined every year for the last 40 odd years. So what we used to take us 2 hours to produce 40 years ago, now taking us maybe 3 or 4 hours. That's not cutting it, especially when we're getting into a digital economy that requires knowledge and competence. Let's take a break. We're talking about economic growth today. Why has that been so elusive? Why, despite all our efforts, successive governments, structural adjustment, you name it, fiscal reform, despite all of those efforts, we just have not been able to get into a growth rhythm. Since 2000, our economy has grown by 14%. 14. Since 2000, that's almost 20 years. I mean, I'm counting up to 2019. I left out 2020 because that was, we were badly affected by COVID. But in those 19 years, 14%, that's less than 1% a year. And we look at other countries that are similar to ours. There's no point in comparing ourselves with Singapore. I mean, we could have done that in the 1970s, but we can't do that anymore. No point in comparing ourselves with Hong Kong. But there are countries that are similar to ours, similar in terms of the issues that they have to deal with, their history, their population size, the nature of their economy. I don't want to compare ourselves with a country that has oil or natural gas, because that may provide the lifeline that we don't have. I'm comparing ourselves with countries that are similar to ours in terms of the resources we have available, in terms of the size of our population, most of which are larger than ours, but not that much larger. So you talk about countries like Costa Rica, you talk about Damrep, you talk about Panama, you talk about Honduras, and we could go further. We could talk about Guatemala. They have similar problems. They have serious crime issues, some of them. They have problems of low per capita income. some of them lower than ours. They have problems of infrastructure deficit, a whole range of things. And yet, they seem to be able to be making bigger strides than we are making. And I think it's important for us to really focus on it to try and see if we can find out why. What is missing? What are we doing wrong? Or what is it that we're not doing? We had a discussion a short while ago with the Economist, financial analyst, Mr. Dennis Chung. And his view is that we're just not productive. We're not a productive people. He didn't use the word, but one could almost say we are slothful. We spend an hour doing what somebody in Damrep spend 40 minutes doing. And therefore, they're able to produce more than we are able to produce in any given period of time, and they're able to grow where we're not growing. And that, of course, the question of productivity involves a whole range of things. It involves our training, the extent to which our workers have the skills that are necessary to make them competitively productive. It involves also our legislation, our labor market framework, and various things like that. Dennis Chung made a point that labor market reform seems to have been, it has been discussed and researched and studied and been the subject of various committees and commissions. But he's arguing that in terms of the action that ought to have been taken, that we have been missing. I really want us to try and see if we can get a handle on this. We're hoping in a short while to speak with Dr. Damian King, who is a lecturer in economics at the university, well known. He's also the executive director of Capri. I'm sorry, I'm being told now that we have Mr. Gassan Azan, who is a well-known businessman, investor. Last time I had him on the program, we were talking about his groundbreaking investment in agriculture out in Bernard Lodge. Today we really want to talk to him in terms of this broader issue, economic growth. Gassan Azan, welcome to the program.
Morning, Mr. Golding. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks.
Tell me something. You're a major investor in Jamaica. You have your finger on the pulse. I quoted some figures at the start of the program, Gassan. I try to compare ourselves with countries that have similar problems of crime, problems of bureaucracy. I'm talking about countries like Honduras, Damrep, Costa Rica, Panama, with maybe larger population, but not that much larger. Gassan, when I look at these countries, the lowest performance in terms of economic growth since 2000 is El Salvador, which is 46%. But you look at countries like Honduras saw 106% growth since 2000. Ours, Gassan, is 14%. What's wrong?
Well,
I mean, why does a country like Honduras, which has a big crime problem, has a big education problem? I mean, their educational system, I believe, is not even up to our scratch. But they grew by 106%. We just barely came out of the starting block at 14%. What's wrong?
I think our focus, Bruce, has been skewed in the wrong direction. And when I say that, economic growth entails a number of things. It's not just one particular metric that makes up what growth and development is. So I think we need to talk about development as well. We sit and we will say, well, we have a housing boom, or we have a tourist boom. Is it really enough to trigger the growth that we need? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things I saw in the calculations of the GDP and all of that, the growth figures in Jamaica particularly, if you move the needle in agriculture and what you produce locally, you would be surprised the triggers that get pulled in terms of economic growth. The dilemma that you have is that you can't get enough business people to invest in those sectors.
Why?
Because,
Why?
I think it's a historical issue. One being the 70s in Jamaica, where capital felt very uncomfortable, and so it started to leave. Under your previous Prime Minister, in 1980, some degree of capital started to come back, and then it left again. And then we had FinSac. So if you look at the history here, it's almost saying that we have never learned our lessons properly in 50 years.
But then you're talking about agriculture, Gassan. But you look at the McConnells. They have invested their whole life in agriculture.
Yeah, but you have only two families. The Johnstons are similar, Bruce. Charlie out with Jamaica Producers. Two families alone cannot move this needle, you know.
Yeah, but if it makes sense to them and it makes sense to you because you have taken the plunge, why is it not making sense to others? Gassan, while you
the answer to that,
while you catch your breath, allow me to bring in Dr. Damian King, who is a well-known economist and lecturer, head of Capri, because I want Damian to help us with this conundrum. Damian, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, sir. Hi, Gassan.
David, how are you?
I'm good.
Damian, I keep asking the question. I told you when I called you earlier to invite you on the program, I told you that I spent the weekend looking at some numbers and I'm trying for the hell. I cannot figure out why are we so allergic to economic growth. Gassan said we're not paying enough attention to agriculture. Dennis Chung told me earlier it's that we're not paying enough attention to productivity. I get a bit frustrated because many of the things we were told we needed to get right, we have been getting right. No, I wouldn't have expected that after all the efforts at fiscal reform and so on, I wouldn't have expected that we would now be clipping at 5-6% growth every year. But good God, man, we've been averaging less than 1%. What's wrong?
Well, the first thing to do, I think, is to have an appreciation for the complexity of the problem, that economic growth is an organic thing. Economic growth is something that emerges from not, 3 or 4 big investment projects in the pipeline. The way to get 3 million people to be more prosperous is to allow 3 million people to become more productive and efficient. So you really need to get all of the pieces in place. You have to get them not worried about inflation from day to day. You have to allow them not to have inordinary delays in being able to get to work and get to the shop and back. You have to have them not be worried about the exchange rate, flying by 20% in a few weeks. You have to have them feeling that if they make an investment, that they'll be able to reap the return, and somebody won't rob them or reap the crop for them, or break into their house when they have, use the earnings from their investment to buy a nice TV. So a lot of elements have to be in place.
But are you telling me, Davian, are you telling me that Honduras and El Salvador have done that? Because their growth rates make me feel shame.
Well, I mean, places can have little bumps from time to time.
No, I'm talking about sustained over 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, they have peaks and troughs, but
right.
When you average it out, they are way ahead of us, and they have some of the same problems that we have.
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, we have done a lot in putting a lot of the basic elements in place. We have more or less dealt with the inflation problem. We're having a spike now for particular reasons having to do with supply chains and commodity markets that, as much as they are concerning to a lot of people, they are temporary.
But we're not out of line with the rest of the world.
Exactly. And because we're not out of line with inflation to the rest of the world, it means that the exchange rate problem is not going to be as great, because exchange rate is just a difference in inflation rate overall. And we're not so worried now about fiscal collapse, but so a lot has been done, a lot has been put in place in terms of fiscal management, in terms of inflation, in terms of investment in infrastructure. But I can call attention to a couple of problems still. Crime remains a huge problem. People don't want to think about improving themselves in particular.
El Salvador has a bigger crime problem than we do.
I understand that, and you can make these one-on-one comparisons, but we still need to deal with the crime problem.
Yes, I agree.
It's costing us 2 or 3 percentage points of growth a year. Secondly, bad luck has played a part, because the pandemic has set back the growth trajectory significantly. And it's important for us to remember that Jamaica, from a fiscal and economic point of view, managed the pandemic well. We've recovered from it quickly, and that is because of all those things that I spoke about that we put in place before. And the war in Ukraine is having its impact now, again, in terms of making people more nervous about investments in strange countries, and in terms of commodity prices, and in terms of uncertainty. But it is still the expectation that the things that Jamaica has put in place in terms of macroeconomic stability and macroeconomic improvement, and improvements in doing business, that dividend is still yet to come. And I am optimistic. I am highly optimistic about economic growth in Jamaica over the next few years.
Let me get Gassan's comments on that. Gassan, you heard that. What is your reaction?
I tend to agree with Damian on that, Bruce. There's no question that we've had a little run of bad luck with the pandemic and the whole war with Ukraine, which obviously would destabilize a number of economies, including ours. But what we have put in place, I agree, is solid stuff. What I would like to see more of, if you look at the United States, for example, they actually, and I'd love to hear Damian's opinion on this, they pursue an immigration policy which benefits the growth that they have had over 50 years or 100 years, where they have migrants coming in and actually training up their own people or the regular population then to get to a level of skills. I heard the Prime Minister last week talking about importing skilled labor where necessary. And to be very honest with you, the way that we are progressing in Jamaica, if we don't bring in skilled labor to train up our own labor and to fill the immediate void, we're going to have a problem achieving those same growth rates that we're talking about. So I'd love to hear Damian's opinion on that one as well.
Well, let me say two things to that. The first one is that you are hard-pressed to find an economist who does not believe that inward migration is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And the second point I want to make is the reason for that. People who are afraid of inward migration is people who subscribe to a fallacy that the amount of production an economy has is somehow fixed. And if you are bringing in somebody to work, it's taking the place of somebody in the local economy who can do that job. But the whole discussion we're having is about economic growth. That when you bring in somebody to work, then the economy benefits from the productivity of that person. And that has spillover effects to the rest of the economy. So to get to Gassan's point, if he wants to make an investment and he has somebody, even somebody with low skill levels, but not zero, that he wants to bring in, that makes an investment possible or more feasible that will create employment opportunities for other people because he has broken a skill bottleneck.
Well, Damian, perhaps to strengthen your argument, we had President Kagame from Rwanda in Jamaica 2 weeks ago, or last week,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
And I was fortunate to have a brief discussion with him before the state dinner. The sense I got, I mean, because just while he was here, the announcement was made about this new deal that was struck between Rwanda and Britain for them to send the refugees there for processing. And I got a sense, I'm not quoting him, but I got a sense when I asked him, what is, how is that going to impact Rwanda? They're getting £120 million, which is not a hell of a lot of money, to be quite honest with you. But I got a sense from him that the biggest benefit that he was hoping for was the skills. Because many of these persons, when they finish the processing, they're not going to be allowed into Britain. They're going to be left with the choice of either staying there or finding somewhere else to go. But a lot of these refugees are people who are carrying serious skills with them, and he seems to feel that is where Rwanda will benefit in the long term.
Absolutely. But I mean, the evidence that inward migration benefits economies is quite significant.
Correct. But I think, the Prime Minister made that bold announcement, and I read in the press where he took a lot of heat for it, Damian. And that's why I just said, somebody needs to bring the rational side of the argument to the table.
Well, but we're talking about importing labor, and
I'm going to give you an example from my own businesses. We train. We have a constant training of IT people, and the minute that they reach a certain qualified level, Microsoft certified, let's say, they can go to the U.S. Embassy and get a visa and migrate tomorrow morning. And I can't pay them the level of salary that they can earn in the United States. No, the cost of living might be higher up there, but that's all an issue which they overcome or they cope with.
Let me ask Damian this, because I've raised the question before. We have training institutions. I'm talking about post-secondary. We have tertiary, we have vocational. Damian, I mean, the UWI, for example, I don't know if they still do, but I know they used to do tracer studies to determine what happens to their graduates after they leave the university. Do you know if there's any documentation as to what happened to all of these people that were turning out of heart and so on? Is this something that Capri may want to look at to see now? Is it that they're falling through the cracks, or is it that we're simply not producing enough of them?
Well, I'm not familiar with any studies that look at the graduates of institutions, tertiary institutions, other than the University of the West Indies. But the last one I saw indicated that 3/4 of those that graduate from Mona migrate. That's an astonishingly high number given the level of subsidy of tertiary education in Jamaica.
What would that be happening to the graduates of Hart?
As I said, I've not seen any debate.
Because when the Prime Minister speaks about the shortage of labor in the construction sector, for example, we're talking about, masons and carpenters and welders, steelmen, this kind of thing. Plumbers. And that's what Hart was supposed to have been doing. I would love to know, is it that they're all employed? It's just that we're not producing enough of them? Or is it that we're not training them right?
No, I think the short answer to that is we're not producing enough of them. That carpenter and plumber and that sort of skill set is it's in very short supply in Jamaica. And it's because they get a higher salary abroad. Those type of tradesmen get paid much more when they go abroad.
Well, I think we need to drill down on it. And Damian, perhaps I'm throwing out an invitation to Capri. I remember some time ago speaking with the former Minister of Education, who bemoan the fact that, I can't remember the exact percentage, but a significant percentage of the graduates of CASE, College of Agricultural Science and whatever, in a significant number of the people that were trained there were ending up as taxi operators or grocery shop operators, not in the field that they were trained to be involved in.
Yeah, but I think the nature of our labor market has changed a bit since then. I think the benefit of all of those factors that we spoke about in terms of improvements to the macroeconomic climate earlier, I think the benefit of that is what you are seeing now in the tightening of the labor market and the inability of pretty much every person I know who's in business to get anybody with any modicum of skills to hire.
Well, it's a discussion we need to continue. I'm up on the break and I have to go, but can I thank both of you, Gassan Azan, well-known company executive, Dr. Damian King, head of Capri, university lecturer. Thank you both. Thanks for helping us with this discussion.
Sure, Bruce.
Oh, welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. It's 12:05, almost 12:06 here in Kingston, Jamaica. It would be 12:06, just coming up to 12:06, 1:06, I'm sorry, in New York. And we're going to be linking with New York shortly, talking with Beauregard and through him bringing in the Jamaican community in New York. Today we've been talking about economic growth. I mean, it's something that, Lord, has been the subject of so much discussion. People perhaps get tired of it. But you talk about something that is aspirational, and that aspiration just can't be achieved. And you need to step back for a moment to say, no, just what is wrong? Why is it that we talk this thing to death? We try to find out what are the factors, what is causing it. But we just can't get it right. And in the program today, we've spoken with a number of persons well capable of helping us to address this. Dennis Chung, we spoke with Gassan Azan, we spoke with Damian King. There are some issues that have come out of the discussion. One is the question of productivity. And some of that productivity has to do with the inadequacy of our labor force. Our labor force is not capable of providing the skill support that is necessary to support economic growth. The Prime Minister recently suggested that we're going to have to import more labor than we normally import. I think the Ministry of Labor normally issues, I don't know, about 2,000 work permits every year, 2,000 new ones, and they issue renewals, but each year about 2,000 new ones. So over a period of time, you may end up with quite a few thousand persons who are here working on, through work permits. But what the Prime Minister was suggesting is that we're going to have to import much more because we're just not able to provide the skills that are necessary to support the kind of economic activity that will stimulate growth. Beauregard, New York, how are you?
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing all right, feeling good, feeling healthy, and giving thanks.
You're feeling good as some bad weather out to reach you again?
No, man, I hope not. The weather kind of look clear for the rest of the week.
Oh, that's good. I saw a report which suggested that you were going to get some rather cold visitors. But anyhow, how is everything?
Everything is great, sir. How's everything on your side?
Man, I give thanks every day. We're struggling. Today we're discussing economic growth, and why is it that the kind of growth that other countries are enjoying just seems to be escaping us? We're trying to see if we can get a handle as to what it is what we're doing wrong or what we're not doing,
Right.
That needs to correct that, and I'm sure that that's an issue that your listeners would also have an interest in because them, I don't care how long they've been living in New York, you know, they have never really left home.
True indeed.
Their heart is very much here.
True indeed, sir. And I want to see our
and many of them are looking forward to when they finish packing up all little dollars them that they're earning up there. They want to come back home and they want to make sure that this place is ready for them, you know.
Yeah, true indeed. Nothing we like more than to see our economy rise once again and, you know, stimulated and moving forward.
We're trying to get a handle on that today, so that's the discussion. I hope your listeners will find it useful. Thank you so much, both.
You're welcome, sir.
God bless you.
You too.
We're hoping to be joined shortly by Mr. Keith Collister, who is one of the vice presidents of the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce. He's a financial analyst as well, and someone who is well known to certainly to those persons who follow economic discussion in terms of the media. I know he is a occasional columnist. Keith Collister, welcome to the program.
Nice to speak on your program again, sir.
I'm glad to have you, Keith. Keith, I want you to help me. I mean, if I sound exasperated, the truth is that I am. I spent some time over the weekend looking at our economic performance over the last 20 years.
Yes.
I looked at the economic performance. I tried to identify some countries that had issues that are similar to ours. You know, you hear about, you know, part of our problem is the crime, part of our problem is bureaucracy, part of our problem is our educational system. So I looked at countries that, you know, on all of those indices were comparable to ours. And then I looked at some particular data that had to do with level of capital investment, level of foreign direct investment flows, the ease of doing business index that the World Bank puts out. And when I look at all of those indices, Keith, we don't measure up badly. Matter of fact, we do better on some of those indicators than some of the countries that I'm comparing us with. But then when I look at their growth records, their growth performance, Honduras, which has a whole heap of problems that there are some problems that I hope we don't acquire. Honduras economy grew over the last 20 years by 106%. Ours grew by 14%. El Salvador, they grew by 41%. We grew by 14%. El Salvador has a higher murder rate than we do. What's going on, Keith? I mean, what's wrong?
Well, I think you have it's a very good point. I share your frustration. I think there are reasons. Jamaica's problems, I think, are, you know, you've mentioned them. We can do a quick run through. You mentioned crime. You've mentioned, labor skills as a problem. Of course, you could add weaknesses in competition here, you know, whether the customs is as efficient as it could be, access to finance, inefficient, relatively inefficient or high cost energy, and of course the logistics sector is not as developed as it could be, and you could add a few other things, but I actually think that it is a good question. Why has Jamaica not moved forward when we seem to have a lot of the things that would require us to move forward? Now, one of the answers I would say to that is I don't think we've really developed any new industries. You will remember a presentation we watched a long time ago. I can't remember the exact name of it, but in my view, we need new export industries in Jamaica. If you think about it, We had tourism. Well, we still have tourism. We've had tourism for decades. We have BPO now, which we could have had earlier, in my view, if we'd done certain things. But okay, now we've got it's a fairly large sector now, but it's still not. It's not such a large sector. It's not so large. It drives a lot of employment, but it's still not as large in terms of, say, FX earnings, right? We've been talking for a long time about logistics and, really expanding that. And I think that is a huge opportunity. But I don't think for some reason, we haven't yet got that really moving, I would love to, for example, see Vernon Field, the fabled project which you're familiar with, finally get one of those big carriers, logistics airlines in the United States to come there and, really try and create a sort of we talked about multimodal logistics facilities. We still haven't got anything that looks remotely close to that. So that's one area. We lost a lot of manufacturing, as you well know as well, over time. If you remember that Donald Harris from the 90s had done an analysis of the manufacturing sector in Jamaica, and basically that was before it really got hammered. So he did looked at different sectors which could provide opportunities. Now, of course, this is around 1997. Somewhere I still have the book. Basically, all the sectors that were mentioned, of course, had a further significant decline over a long period of time. They had multiple factors all hurting them. And I think that's part of the story, by the way, the fact that we've had basically a continuously contracting manufacturing sector over over decades. So that's a key part of it. So we've had a lot of different things. Obviously, we know about energy costs. That's part of not having a strong manufacturing sector. I think there are opportunities in light manufacturing now, by the way, and with this sort of U.S. emphasis on nearshoring presents that. But of course, if we want to get some of that business that will come from U.S. supply chains being shifted, we need to do a number of things which we haven't yet done.
Yeah, but
that's a good starting point.
But before you get there, and I want you to detail those for us. But before you get there, if I were able to have on the program a manufacturer, an investor out of El Salvador or out of Honduras, they don't have any oil. We don't have oil either. They have crime rates just like ours. What would they say to me? Why is it that they are busy churning out output that is driving economic growth? Their education system is not superior to ours.
No.
I'm just trying to see if I can find out, Keith, just what is wrong. Are we not counting right or what?
No, I think they... In those two cases, and you've chosen two countries which I agree with you, we should definitely be able to do better than. I think, and they're not some countries that I've really looked at closely. But in the case of El Salvador, I think they had a relative stability. I actually think they've got some issues now, by the way, so I wouldn't say that they're ones to compare us with. Their bond prices are now at 40 cents on the dollar, by the way. But basically they had a period of they had a relative stability, so grew a little bit a year, whereas we did not. We've had a very low growth or zero growth for decades, as you know. In the case of Honduras, I think some of it might be due to the fact I think they picked up some textile industry business. So if you remember, we lost that business it seemed, and we never got it back. And I think also the agriculture sector might be a little better in those countries. But and as you know, agriculture has performed very poorly in Jamaica over a number of decades. So if we think about it, I think if we think about it and say, all right, we had for most of the period, and very recently you've seen some signs of a little bit of manufacturing recovery, but it's been very recent. But for most of our period, we've had a sort of declining manufacturing industry. We've had tourism, but it's been like an aircraft on one wing. We've had some BPO, which is a relatively new business, and it's got to a sort of level. It's now quite significant in terms of jobs, but it's not that significant in terms of moving the needle in terms of economic output. So you've had declining manufacturing, as we already discussed, and you've had also declining agriculture. And government services have been also, stagnant or so on. Maybe that's a good thing, because you don't want to have government services that are too large relative to the size of your economy. But if you look at, for a long period of time, if you look at how we've been operating, you will see our traded sector has been declining relative to our non-traded sector, and the prices. You can see that the non-traded sector has actually got more of the output for the most part. The one exception to this, I think, is actually tourism. But tourism by itself can't drive an economy of our size. So I think that, and of course, as you know, we had a very severe financial crisis in the 90s, and which continued, the impact of which continued right through. First, from a access to finance standpoint for the first decade of this decade. And then we had a very severe macro crisis that, we were always on the verge of a macro crisis, as you know. We just tipped off into it because we're the global economy, the global financial crisis and so on. So we were on the verge, recovering from that huge macro debt that we had from FinSec, and then we got tipped over in the 2008 period, and so we had that severe macro crisis to recover from for the second decade of this century. So we were only just starting to recover from all of that when, of course, COVID then hit us. So I would say the answer is you had a series of non-stop crises of different sorts that kept the financial crisis in the 90s, which morphed into which the impact which affected us for most of the first decade of this century, which then morphed into a sort of macro crisis from the debt that was accumulated by virtue of that bailout, amongst other reasons.
What do you see going forward? We're still not out of COVID, although we seem to be transitioning to sort of living with it and coping with it. We have the Ukraine situation that is impacting the global economy. It's going to continue to impact the supply chain. Ukraine and Russia are major producers of critical staples. We have the plus energy. But this is something that will affect all economies worldwide, so that that in itself ought not to make us uncompetitive. What do you see are our prospects over the next 2-3 years?
Well, I think we are going to be like the rest of the world, and like many developing countries, we are going to be impacted by there's a food shock. There's an energy shock. And for those emerging market countries that are not well prepared in terms of their debts, they will also have some kind of debt shock. Some of them, we've already seen an example in Sri Lanka, a similar economy in some ways to Jamaica, with, reliant on tourism and so forth. They had a different tourism experience from us, of course, when we managed to bring our tourism back much faster. I think they were, it was very far delayed because of different dynamics in that part of the world. We were fortunate to be next door to the United States. So basically, you have these shocks. So those are going to definitely impact our economic growth over the next 2 to 3 years, and also inflation, and in terms of inflation and so on. Having said that, there are things that we, as you rightly pointed out, we are better now than we were before in terms of things like access to finance. We have some infrastructure more than before. So we have stuff to work with. Where I think, obviously, the crime and violence issue, we still haven't seemed to have got a handle on that. But as you say, other countries have managed to grow, even with high crime rates. So we shouldn't regard that as to say we throw our hands in the air and say we can't grow. One of the ones that concerns me most at the moment, and it's getting a little bit of attention, is this whole issue of labour skills and mismatches and so on, and of course importing of labour, which is obviously what the Prime Minister is worried about. So that is clearly a concern. But what I would say is, from an opportunity standpoint, I think we need to start thinking again about, and I think we do have some of the pieces now. We are now creating a venture capital. We are now creating a sort of what I would call a private equity ecosystem. We didn't have that before. That is something that is now starting to get to a point. It's not there yet. We don't have the U.S. ecosystem, but it's now getting to a point where you could say it's significant. I actually had written a paper on this sometime back in 2006, and now I think we're getting closer to the realization of that paper through the efforts of the Development Bank of Jamaica and so on. So it's a long-standing initiative, and it's gone through several administrations, but it's now reaching what I would call a point where you start to concede people will start to get funded. It still needs to be accelerated, by the way. We're still at what I would call a very early stage there. Bank financing is better now than it ever was. There's more competition. It has, for decades.
Keith,
so there are. What I'm saying is there some of the preconditions for a turnaround, what I would call faster growth, are starting to emerge, but we're not there yet.
But there is a disconnection that I'm wrestling with. I mean, the Prime Minister spoke last week about the shortage of labor, particularly he emphasized in the construction industry, but you and I know that it applies in several other sectors, right?
A lot of other areas,
okay.
Yes.
Now, I would think that if I were a youngster, and I heard the Prime Minister make a statement like that, I would want to get some further and better particulars. What are the skills that the Prime Minister said we're short and we have to go import people? Where can I go and get some training? How can I jump on this thing? Because what it means, I mean, it's cheaper to employ me than to import somebody from abroad. So if I can get that skill, then I have a job.
Sure.
Now, I've raised that because there's a former minister of government, who told me, I mean, he said to me, I lobbied, I made representations, I pressured the government for a skills training center in my constituency. And eventually it was built, well equipped, state-of-the-art equipment, teachers. And after 3 months after the opening, only two students were enrolled. And he couldn't understand what is wrong with the people in his community, why they're not taking advantage of this. What is wrong, Keith?
Well, I don't know if I myself can answer that alone, but what I do think is that we have got used to a policy of low expectations here. So when you're the problem with being in an economic growth, you're familiar with the concept of hysteresis. What it really means is that what happened before can affect what your situation now. So I believe people are not used to the idea of getting a job, getting out there. They're not used to the idea that there's a new industry coming. They've heard these stories before. Probably that's part of it. Part of what we need is part of what we need is a mindset change to say, look, these are actually opportunities. If maybe programs such as yours.
But I thought the market would deal with that. You're a market man. Why is the market not dealing with that?
But I think the market, listen, the market needs some. Whilst I am a market man, and I do, the market sometimes I think needs a bit of a push, and also that people out there. There are people out there who sometimes need a helping hand to understand what is best for them. So, when I come back to this point that we haven't seen success breed success. We haven't seen economic growth here of the type that we had in the 60s, 5% per annum, or the type that we had for a very short period in the second half of the
1980s.
Of the 80s. You need to have something like 5% per annum to really get yourself, otherwise you're really not. And there's a lot of countries that have managed to do that, as you know, maybe not all at the same time, maybe not for extent. The real trick, of course, is can you do this for like 4 decades? And if you can be like a Singapore and do 10% per annum for several decades, then you're even better off. Yeah. And that comes, that's part of, maybe, I don't know if we have how much time we have, but of course we could discuss some of those countries that have.
I'm running out of time, but the search is going to continue.
Yes. But so I think part of it is we just had such a difficult period for so long that even businessmen. If you think about some of the businessmen, I think generation. If you were a businessman in the 70s, you got wiped out, or a lot of them, except for the ones who survived and so on. So they did okay, but a large portion of the professional and business classes would have got wiped out in the 70s.
Keith.
And then they got wiped out again in the 90s.
But Keith,
no, I'm just saying. So it's a generational thing. It's a generational thing. So now we're back at the point where we just about reached the point where the people who got the two generations that got wiped, we're on a third generation now. So I see hope coming out of that. But I think it's going to require a bit of time, but I think we're going to need a bit of a push.
I want to join in that hope, but I mean, I've looked at countries, Keith, that have been through devastating civil wars. And once they got over that, they got going. I mean, take Ukraine.
Yes.
If Ukraine gets out of this, something that Russia is going on with, despite all of the devastation and destruction you have seen there, watch them take off again. It's almost like it's part of the instinct.
But I think
what's wrong with our instinct?
I think you're getting to one of the key points here. Education is critical on all of this, right? If you have a country that, like Jamaica, which has been exporting 80 to 90% of its people, of its educated people, of its people who've got qualifications and so on, and if you are not able to sort of create the environment whereby you will have either your what you want to call your Chinese returning, or your Indians returning, or your Irish returning, or whichever nationality you want to choose, who brought back skills from the diaspora, until the Jamaican diaspora thinks that it should be returning for opportunities in Jamaica.
Yes.
Then we're going to have a problem.
Yes.
And my view on it is that the core reason, which I think you're trying to get to, is why we haven't had that turnaround, other than these macro reasons, which we can expound upon. But the point you're making, the core point you're making, which I agree with, is until you have those guys who went to MIT or whichever country or whatever university in the United States that you want to choose, to say, I'm coming back to Jamaica to start a new industry in Jamaica because the environment is more attractive here and I can export to the United States. When we're ready for that, then Jamaica will turn around. I actually do think we have an opportunity now, by the way, because for services in particular, because what has happened is the world has now decided, and other countries, by the way, are taking better advantage of this than us. I think this idea of importing labor, to me, that's actually not the key point. The point is we should be really trying to target our knowledge workers globally, Jamaicans in particular. I know some Jamaicans that came back here. They said, well, now I can work from overseas, from abroad, and they just stayed here. Now, it's only a few. That's the problem.
I'm in trouble. I'm out of time.
Hundreds, not thousands or tens of thousands.
I'm out of time.
But there you go. So educated people starting new businesses in Jamaica for export to the United States. I think that's your answer.
Keith, we have to get back to this discussion. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back at Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. Today we're talking about the economy, economic growth. Why has economic growth been so elusive, so unattainable? And we've been talking to a number of persons, trying to see if we can get an understanding, a handle. Because I believe that despite all of the conversations that we have had and the analyses that we have done, I still believe that we're missing something. And I'm trying to see if I can get some help to identify what it is that we're missing. We're very pleased now to be joined by Professor Densil Wiliams, who is the Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of the West Indies. Densil, are you there?
Hi, Prime Minister. How are you?
Listen, Densil, I'm so glad to have you, because you are an expert in terms of economic analysis and that kind of something. I only left UW with a first degree. I want you to help me. I have spent some time looking at Jamaica's economic performance over decades.
Yes.
I look at our performance since 2000. Our economy has grown by 14% since 2000. Yes. And that's up to 2019. I don't want to include 2020 because that was the COVID collapse, no?
Yes.
And that may distort our numbers. So that would make it worse, but that would be a distortion.
Yes.
So up to 2019, we had recorded between 2001 and 2019, 19 years, 14% growth. And I said, now look, we need to find out what it is. And of course, these numbers would not include, for example, the FinSAC meltdown, which I would argue was a self-inflicted wound, no?
Yes.
So I said, well, all right, now we have a whole heap of problems. We have an education problem, we have a crime problem, we have a bureaucracy problem, we have all kind of issues that people have. We have the level of investment, both in terms of FDI flows as well as in terms of gross capital formation.
Yes.
So I said, no, I spent some time over the weekend, and I said, no, let me look at some other countries that have similar problems. And I chose a few. I chose El Salvador because they have a higher murder rate than we do. Mm-hmm. I chose Honduras. They have a bigger crime rate than we have. I looked at Costa Rica. They're better off in many respects. I looked at Dam Rep. I looked at Panama. But what I found was that on the indices that I was trying to do a comparison of, things like ease of doing business, things like foreign direct investment, things like gross capital formation as a percentage of GDP, crime levels, education levels. In many of those, we were comparable, or in some respects even better But these economies, Densil, the lowest one was El Salvador. Their economy grew by 46% when ours grew by 14%.
Yes.
I look at Honduras. I don't know that Honduras is any poster boy for economic development. But Honduras' economy grew since 2001 by 101%.
Mm-hmm.
We grew by 14%. Please, I'm begging you, help me to get out of my confusion because I don't understand it.
Yes. Thanks, Prime Minister. I mean, your analysis is always very spot on in terms of, bringing the empirical data to bear. But, while you did those benchmarks and stuff, we didn't have to even look very far. Look at even our own Antigua and Barbuda here, which before COVID was growing at 6-7% per year as well. And that is right in our backyard. But if we were to step back a bit and look at Jamaica, you've identified some of the critical issues that we face in terms of social issues, etc. But one of the challenges that we have to look at is as it relates to our productivity. I think that is really where we are missing something. We have to look at that in a closer way because, as you know, productivity really looking at, listen, if I have the same numbers of hours in the day, yes, how much output can I turn out compared to my partners, right? So the guys in El Salvador, assuming that we have a guy in El Salvador picking oranges and they have 8 hours, and we have a guy in Jamaica picking oranges and they have 8 hours as well. The man in El Salvador may be able to pick 20 oranges while the person in Jamaica is able to pick only 10 or 15 oranges.
Can I
we have to ask ourselves, why is that the case?
I want you to pause there because I want to drill down on that some more.
Yes.
To what extent is that productivity deficit?
Yes.
Is that a factor of labor and the competence of that labor? To what extent is it also a factor of weak management? To what extent is it also a factor of the difficulty that orange picker has in getting to the orange field in terms of public transportation? The extent to which when he gets there, he has had a proper breakfast so that he is energetic.
So no, we are, it's just TV you're seeing me smiling because that's exactly where we now need to go. Look at what are the input into this productivity issue that we're facing. And it is not only the human being himself, not only the man who's picking the orange himself that you have to look at, but you have to look at the surrounding factors that are actually driving that productivity. So you spoke about, for example, his or her ability to get to the farm. Yeah? Do you have proper transportation system? Do you have comfortable transportation system so that when by the time they get to the farm, they're not feeling tired, they're not feeling drained? Yeah? Did you get a proper meal, for example? Do you have management that is actually motivating you, the worker, to actually do the things? Assuming that you are both workers would have the same amount of technology, would have the same exposure to picking the oranges, etc. Yeah, but do you have management that is now organizing the workers in such a way that they can maximize on picking their oranges? So that comes to a management issue in terms of productivity. We talk about the socio-economic issues as well. Do we have the right roadways, the right transportation system, all those things? And indeed now, do we have an education system that is actually producing the labor that they can be more creative in the way that they pick their oranges, for example? Do you give them a chance to think about, I'm picking an orange and I'm not just going to follow the manuscript that is in the book, but I'm going to look at the most creative way to do it to get the most oranges that I can pick in a day. Those are the kinds of issues that now productivity have to address.
But let me ask you, I mean, have we done any serious analytical study of this? In other words, if I were still in office and you were making this submission to me,
yes,
I would probably say to you, no, Prof, you have identified 8 issues.
Yes.
Give me your priorities now. Which one would I need to tackle as number 1? What would that be?
Okay. If I were to say tackle number 1, most people would know my pet peeve, education. I think the way that the education system is now structured, it does not allow for that kind of creativity. Yeah? So if you can have the problems with the socio-economic, which I just spoke about, you're not having the transportation and the management not organizing you properly, etc. But if you're educated in such a way that you're able to think and think creatively. You can find a way to get around those kinds of things. Even if you reach work late, you may say to yourself, I reach work late, but I know I have to pick 20 oranges for the day. How can I organize myself that I can actually catch up on the time that I lost on transportation?
Well,
That's the kind of creativity that you need. But our education system is not giving that. What it does, it gives you a lot of regurgitation and passing exams.
All right,
let us trying to get it right.
Let us drill down. Let us drill down on that some more. I love what you're telling me, because it's taking me into an area where maybe we can get our hands on the problem. Let us take our education system. The Prime Minister spoke last week about the shortage of labor, and he specifically mentioned the construction sector. But there are other sectors that you and I would know face. I mean, our health services, for example, face a serious shortage, right? Yeah. But take the construction sector. We have vocational training institutions that are turning out people every year. They're giving them a certificate to say that you're certified at level 1, 2, 3, whatever.
Right.
Something is missing, Densil. Something is clearly missing. Have we asked Dr. Damian King earlier when I had him on the program whether we have done any sort of tracer studies to find out now when these people leave Papine, the center at Papine or any of the centers across the island, what happens to them? I remember some time ago, Maxine Henry Wilson, when she was Minister of Education, bemoaning to me the fact that many of the graduates of Cape, that we spend a lot of money training to be agronomists, were ending up as taxi operators.
Absolutely.
Eh? Yeah, now, what is... it's no point in, for example, if our institutions, and I'm not talking now just about the universities, although I include those, but if our institutions, including our vocational training facilities, if they are turning out people that are not meeting the requirements of the job market, particularly as we become more digitized, as we move more into knowledge-driven job demands, if we're not producing them, then we're wasting that money that we're spending on them.
The value for money wouldn't be great if you're not meeting the demand that is there. I give you a further thing, Prime Minister. When we did some time ago a tracer study for the tourism program that we had at the Mona campus, interestingly what we found, so we were training people in masters in tourism, etc., and we found that less than 10% of them end up working in the tourism sector. The majority of them went into teaching. And the question we asked, why was that the case? And when we dug much deeper, we found that what we were doing, we were producing people who are not meeting the specific requirements that these sectors need. So what I've said to my colleagues is that, listen, if you're going to build any program going forward, there must be what I call an experiential learning component to that particular program. So I take, for example, the MBA at Mona. What we have decided to do is that, listen, we can't be training people to say they're going out to manage multi-billion-dollar business and budgets and stuff, and they have never seen how a business works. So we have said we keep you in class for 21 months, and for the last 3 months, you have to go out into the field to get some experience, etc. I think that needs to be a fundamental part of our curriculum reform.
Well, let me ask you this.
How we are going to go forward.
Let me ask you this, and I'm going to pin you to the wall. You're a university administrator. To what extent is the UWI, and you can speak for them, you cannot speak for the others, but to what extent is the university in constant, sustained dialogue with the market, with the manufacturers, with the tourism industry, to see whether or not your training and their requirements are in sync, or whether or not I was very concerned some time ago when I looked at your tracer studies, of what happened to your graduates.
Yes.
I was very, very concerned, and I wrote an article about it. At the extent to which, first of all, the graduates were underpaid because they were employed in disciplines for which they were never trained. And also the extent to which many of them were unemployed when the Sunday Gleaner was carrying 7, 8, 9, 10 pages of ads for skills. And I'm trying to say, but, is it that these UW graduates don't buy the gleaner? Because here are jobs. Yeah. Something is not clicking.
Prime Minister, when you think about it, this is what. So, in terms of our own university, I know we have some way to go, but you're very familiar, I'm sure, with the new strategic plan that we have, which talks about industrial alignment. That was important to place in the context of where we're going as a university, because what we are now trying to do is to say that when we are designing programs and designing our curriculum, exactly what you have identified, we need to be speaking with the players in industry who are now taking our graduates and to say to them, how can we prepare graduates to meet your needs? What are the things that you require? How can we help you there? And that's a kind of model that we're actually now using when we're talking about curriculum design. As you know, more than most persons, university is a very complex place, and you have to start somewhere. I can speak specifically because I was at the business school then. At the business school, we have taken a particular position at every new program that we're bringing on. The first thing we have to do is to have a breakfast meeting with the major players in the sector that this program is actually going to be targeting. So if it is finance and banking, we want the financiers. If it's logistics, we want the logistics people. We want to sit them around the table. We want to hear what they have to say, and we incorporate those things in our program so that when we are through with our graduates, they can actually meet the demand that is there. That is something that the university is actually looking at, to be honest. You're also familiar with the university here in Boston, not Harvard, but Northeastern. As you know, that's one of the best co-op universities anywhere in the world. Every student that enters Northeastern University has to leave with some kind of experiential learning. Even if they're doing English literature, they have to find a major publisher to go to see how publishing house works, etc. That's the kind of thing that we want to push our university. That's the direction we want to push our university in. And that is really what our new strategic plan is calling for.
Well, that comment is going to lead me to an issue which perhaps will take us up to the end of the program, and I want to explore this with you. During the time that I was on campus the last couple of years, I was impressed. Impressed is not the word. I was surprised.
Yes.
And impressed when I spent some time with the Faculty of Science and Technology.
Yes.
And learned about the kind of breakthrough research that they had done, some of which, apart from its academic value, some of which has tremendous investment, real economy potential.
Yes.
At the same time, I was distressed that the private sector, and particularly the manufacturing sector, the industrial sector, did not see the UWI as its first point of reference if it needed to address technological challenges, it needed to develop new ways of doing old things, right?
Yes.
And I believe that was something that needed a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I was distressed that, first of all, the many people in the private sector just didn't think enough of the UWI. They didn't. Yeah. They believed that the UWI just produced PhDs, academic stuff and theoretical stuff. Yes. But also, at the university, the scientists seem to have been. I hope I'm not misrepresenting them, but I got the impression that a lot of the stuff that they have developed, they have it locked up in a drawer somewhere, and they don't want nobody open that drawer and find it.
Yes. PM, that is really where the conversation is needed, because we have to also appreciate that the truth is that we don't market ourselves enough as a university. And again, that is where the new thinking is coming in terms of strategic thinking and the strategic planning going forward. We, as you know, we came out of a colonial system as a university system. So interaction with the private sector and such was never always at the forefront of your mind. You were always there to see the government bureaucracy and, to do the pedagogical work work, to produce PhDs and stuff. But the interaction with industry has never always been at the forefront of our minds. So because of that, there is a tension between industry and academia. Over the past few years, as you would have alluded to, you would have seen a transition where now we're making that kind of connection. We're having the conversation. You yourself was here as a fellow in the university, and I know you did a lot of work interacting with faculty and trying to bridge that gap between praxis and academia. And so that's the conversation that needs to be developed. It needs to go much further, however, where we now need to have our private sector partners being integral in terms of the conversation that they want to have with the university and the university partners, telling them what is it that we have and how we can actually help to solve these problems. Now,
because then
with the PSOJ. And I recall we had an innovation committee at the PSOJ some time ago. I'm not sure where that has gone. But that kind of conversation needs to happen. Our people in the academe need to be sitting in the chambers of commerce, in the private sector organization, the Export and Manufacturing Association, be at their table as well to have a part of the discussion.
This may very well be one of the missing links that we're trying to find and can't find. I mean, many of the countries that have been enjoying sustained, robust economic growth,
yes,
a lot of that growth has been driven out of university campuses.
Absolutely. You're very, very correct. You're very, very correct. Because I was going to say that if you look at a lot of the cities, especially, and wider countries that enjoy significant growth, there is almost a symbiotic link between universities and those cities. In essence, they have these things they call industrial parks. So when you go to Boston and when you go to California and those kind of places, you realize that the universities are almost intertwined into the cities. Yeah. You can't separate them, and that is what one of the missing link in our system. Because you would appreciate, PM, that we are doing all of these things, but remember, for you to get the high levels of growth that you need and move away from the 0.5 or the 0.1%, which you described so accurately in your opening comments, we really need to have value-added products. We can't continue to do the things the traditional way. Take, for example, agriculture. As you have identified, we need to look how we move up the value chain in agriculture and not just produce some normal commodities for the hotel and tourists come and eat and move on. We need to look at the agro-processing, and we need to look at the higher value things that we can now export for agriculture. Export agriculture is going to be the way forward, for example. Yeah? And there is no way we can go without that. But the university has to play a part in that.
We could spend another half an hour on this, but I'm out of time. And my producer,
I know.
My producer is telling me you and then just take yourself out of this place because you're out of time.
Oh, Lord. But listen, thank you very much for the time, PM. And
thank you so much,
again, yeah?
Professor Densil Wiliams, Pro-Vice Chancellor, University of West Indies. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for adding to the discussion. We're out of time. It's after 1 o'clock. I need to be out of here. But thank you so much for joining me. I'll be back here next week. Next week, Monday, 2nd of May, I believe it will be. For all of you, thank you so much for being here today. Have a good week. Join me again next week, Monday.